Welcome to Life's Rich Tapestry, a podcast exploring the narrative of people's layered lives. Listen in on courageous conversations spoken from the heart. Gain insight into another's life as we tackle compelling topics which will expand your mind, help you gain perspective, and might even inspire you to do things differently. My name is Evelyn, and I look forward to your company. And welcome to another show of Life's Rich Tapestry. My next guest, Jayne, is a journalist with 25 years experience with print media. She began her career on Sydney's Daily Telegraph, switching to freelance with various magazine publications while raising her 3 sons. In 2014, her memoir, Missing Christopher, about the suicide of her middle son, was published by Allen Unwin, and in that same year it won the Human Rights Award for Literature. Missing Christopher is the story of her middle son's shocking death and its tragic aftermath for the family. Now, since publication, she has been promoting mental health and suicide prevention through media, the medical and teaching professions, to those people suffering from mental illness or their carers, and those bereaved by the loss of a loved one. So I'd like to welcome Jayne to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. Now, we're going to start from the very beginning, and then we'll just get to what happened. So we have, I'd like you to just start off. Tell us a little bit about your family.
I have 3 boys. I still now have 2. Ben is 39 and Nick is 37. And Ben lives up in the Lake Macquarie area and Nick is in Sydney.
Raising 3 boys, that must have been pretty difficult. So where did you live around Sydney?
The Northern Beaches.
Okay, so you lived around the Northern Beaches. And so tell us a little bit about Christopher.
Well, he was the middle child and he was the funny one. You know, he's always getting into trouble and always trying to make people laugh. He had a naughty sense of humour and he was always looking to make people laugh. His little dirty jokes. And
okay,
like that.
okay. Yeah. And so your other children, we have Ben, who was the eldest. Did they get along, or how was the banter between the 3 of them?
Oh, as little boys, they all got along. Ben and Christopher were the athletic ones, and Nick was the brainiac, as they called him.
Oh, okay,
so while he was off doing things that stimulated his mind, the other 2 would be wrestling in the lounge room, playing football with a pair of socks.
Oh, okay.
So they were all very, very close as young boys.
Okay. Yeah. Were there sort of any issues with your sons as they were growing up? Were they having a few issues, or were they hard children to raise? Or
no, the only problem occurred when they all developed a mental illness.
Okay.
Up until then, they were just 3 boys going to school, playing football, sailing, doing all the normal things boys do.
Yeah.
But they all had some form of mental illness all at the same time.
At the same time, or at the same age?
Same time.
Wow. And was there a trigger for that?
I can't think there would be a trigger because they all would have been affected if there was one particular trigger, but then there wasn't.
Right.
So there may have been a trigger for Nick when I go back and look on it, but that wouldn't explain the other 2 becoming ill at the same time.
And sorry, what were the ages of the 3 boys at that time?
Nick was 11, so 11, 13, 15.
Wow, that must have been an absolute shock for you and your husband. So how did you handle that?
Well, the first indication that there was something wrong was when Nick asked me to come lie down with him on his bed, and he said to me that he was scared because the walls were moving in on him, and he wanted to kill people. He had no control over his mental state. So at first I thought, oh, that's just that he's so florid. The thoughts are so florid that it can't be real.
Yeah.
So I didn't dismiss it, but I didn't take immediate action. And then a few other things happened, and then I thought, okay, we've got to get him some help.
And what sort of help did you get then?
We took him to a psychologist.
And what did he diagnose, the psychologist?
Nick was not diagnosed properly for 2 years.
Wow.
So it went from anxiety to depression, schizophrenia, bipolar. No one could diagnose him. Oh, even OCD was one of the diagnoses.
And the other two sons, the elder sons, what were they?
Ben had depression. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a serious case, but he stayed in his room. He went to school, but he didn't get any enjoyment out of the normal activities like sailing and mixing with his friends. He became a loner.
Wow.
And luckily, we got him onto a medication and it worked straight away. So within 6 months, he was back to his normal self.
Did he continue to take the medication, or was he?
No.
Is he okay?
He took it for about a year, and then he stopped taking it, and he was fine.
And what about Christopher?
Christopher had anxiety and depression, but he hid it. He tried to hide it. So no one except my husband and me knew. So he was able to hide it.
Yeah.
He would still go to school, still play football, still see his girlfriend and his friends. So it was exhausting for him.
Wow. It must have been exhausting for you as a family, too. I can't even imagine. Now, does this sort of mental health issues run in your family, or?
Yes, there is mental illness. I think there's mental illness in everyone's family. We have OCD on one side, we have depression on another side. It's not like it's everyone. It's just one or two people in both of our families. So
So to have all three sons, that would have been really difficult.
Devastating.
Yeah, it was been devastating. So you're spending a lot of time with your three sons, or figuring out what's going on. How was Christopher doing in the midst of all this? Was he getting better, or what was happening?
The problem with Christopher is that, as I said, he would hide his feelings, and whereas Nick was very open and he'd tell me everything that he was feeling, Christopher would prefer to not be in our company so that he wouldn't have to discuss anything with us. So he ran from it, and it was very hard for us to drag him back, to keep him around us, because at that point he was 16. And he just didn't want to face it. He didn't want anyone to know.
Yeah.
And so he was living life at 110% so that no one would recognize it in him.
No one would think that he had a problem. So he was covering it up with being happy, I'm assuming, or with sport. Is that correct?
Yeah, so his main aim in life was to play for the Wallabies. Football was everything to him. And he was the leader of the pack, if you know what I mean. If he wore a particular T-shirt, everyone else bought that T-shirt. He had the same surfboard. So all of his friends looked up to him. So he felt a responsibility, I believe, to maintain that, I'm okay status.
Yeah, so he was a popular young man.
Very.
And so that would have hidden that he had problems because he was popular, people liked him. Tell us just what happened a week before the tragic events of...
Well, that is one of the tragedies, is that he was living with a young girl, 16-year-old girl, because he didn't want to be home with Nick's illness, and he felt that he knew that he was getting as sick as Nick, and he didn't want to confront that. So he went to live with this young girl and her mother, and so we lost a lot of contact.
Yeah.
And even though I spoke to him every day and asked him to please come home, he said, "Not now, Mum, but I will." So that's part of the tragedy.
And did you get a phone call that something was wrong, or
on the night?
Yeah.
So we were at Nick's school, and he was doing a play, and Nick was very sick at that point too. So we're trying very hard to keep him connected to friends and school and drama, which is what he loved. So we got home about 10:30, and we were just getting ready for bed. And the phone was ringing downstairs, and we didn't have a phone upstairs. And we missed it. It rang again, so we knew it was urgent. So we ran downstairs, and it was one of Christopher's friends telling us to get to the beach which is 3 or 4 kilometres away. And he said Christopher had an accident. We knew Nick was asleep, and we locked all the doors, and we went to the beach, and it was pitch dark. It was August, and it was freezing cold. And the first thing we saw was a woman standing on a pathway that led to the swimming pool, and she was vomiting. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. And we went around to the fence which surrounded, which was the cliff was. There was a fence in front of the cliff, and then the swimming pool. And I was running towards where I saw a torch, and a police woman stopped me. I was hyperventilating, and I broke free after a few minutes, and I ran around to where the ambulance and paramedics were, and the waves were crashing, and it was noisy, and there was no light except for torch. I saw them roll him onto a spinal board. So I thought, okay, he's alive. And they very quietly walked up the path to the ambulance, and we just thought he was okay. Well, I did anyway. My husband didn't. But we were standing outside the ambulance, and they were working on him, intubating him and everything. And I was just hoping that his leg was okay, because he had a football match in 2 days' time, an important one. And I was just saying, oh, I just hope his leg's okay. And then the paramedic came and grabbed my hand and lifted me up into the ambulance and just shook his head. And I had to say goodbye.
That must have been, I can't even imagine, that must have been just so terrible. And I know this happened quite a few years ago, but you still probably have that image in your mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always traumatic to even recall it. And I know I had some grief counselling a few years after Christopher's death, and she said, when you watch your child die, you get PTSD, and that stays with you. Yeah. And I've tried to deal with it, but
it would have been really difficult. I do remember from reading the book that when he died, you actually wanted to see him, but your husband didn't.
I had to see him.
You had to see him?
My husband did not want to see him, but by choice he probably wouldn't have.
And probably to make it more real.
Definitely I had to have that closure, but I think it stems from I lost my brother when he was 23 in a motorbike accident, and I wasn't given that opportunity. Okay. And we didn't even have a funeral because my parents couldn't cope with it. So I think I had to have some sort of closure.
Right. Wow. Now tell me so after this has happened, you're planning the funeral. How did you plan the funeral, and how long did you have the funeral from when he died?
My in-laws were great. They came over and dealt with funeral arrangements, etc. And the funeral was actually 6 days later.
Okay, really quickly. And it was at the school, is that right?
Yeah, at his school, and there was 1,500 people there.
Oh my goodness! Wow,
it was awful.
I do remember in the book as well that you were at the funeral, and there was something about just standing there and everyone going through the line, wasn't there? And
I don't know how that happened, but I guess we walked out first, and we were just standing by the church doors, and everyone wanted to hug us. So I think we were there for 2 hours.
Oh my God!
Hugging.
Yeah, and that probably didn't make you feel well at all. Doing that,
I was just exhausted. I hadn't slept for a week, and I was just exhausted. I mean, I was very grateful that everyone came.
Yeah,
it was just totally exhausting.
Yeah. So after this tragedies happened, you said you went to grief counseling, but it took a while before you went to grief counseling. Is that correct? Or you still have Ben, who's having issues. Sorry, was it Ben or was it the
Nick.
other? Nick. Sorry, it was Nick who was so Ben was fine.
Ben was fine.
Yeah, but Nick. So Nick, how did Nick cope with the death of his brother?
Because Nick was so sick, mentally sick, he didn't take anything in. But internally, he crashed. So 2 months after the funeral, he tried to commit suicide in a mental hospital. We had to put him in there because he was so ill. So it was you can imagine there wasn't enough time to grieve because we were so worried about Nick. And I think you probably remember from the book that on the night Christopher died, Nick was on the phone to Lifeline.
Yeah.
So, we didn't know that until the next day.
You were able to place him then in a mental institution, and you just said that he tried to also commit suicide. But after a while, was he getting better?
Well, ironically, when he was in that mental hospital, his psychiatrist noticed his mania. He'd never seen it before. He'd only seen the depressive side. When Nick used to go and see him, he would control his mania. So it wasn't until he was in lockup in the mental hospital that his doctor saw his mania, and he diagnosed him with bipolar.
Okay.
And so the whole regime of medication changed.
And that probably made him much better.
In a month, I saw a change.
Wow.
And it took several months for it to, even longer, maybe a year, for it to level.
Right.
But, that's what it worked. And this doctor saved his life.
When do you think he started getting better and becoming more himself? How old would have he been?
I'd say about 15.
About 15.
So he was very ill for 4 years.
Wow. And what is he doing now?
He's married.
Oh, good. Oh.
He has a nearly 2-year-old son.
Yeah.
He married a beautiful American girl that he met. He was doing a suicide prevention conference in Canada, and a friend of his rang and said, I've got a girl that would love to talk to you. She's having a few issues, and would you pop in to New York and come and meet her? And he did. And they fell in love, and
that's so good.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, that is beautiful.
And so now his whole life is suicide prevention and helping kids with mental health issues. So he goes to schools all over Australia and talks to high school kids mainly about the death of his brother. Yeah. He wants to have open conversations with kids and to ask them to be open and honest about their own mental health issues, because he knows that's the only way that you can prevent these suicides and prevent people getting into real mental health trouble. Yeah. If you don't talk about it, you can't help them.
Yeah. And I definitely would like him on this show soon. That'd be fantastic. So Christopher, he died in 2002 and your book came out a little over 10 years later. What made you decide, I've got to really write a book about this?
There are a couple of reasons. One, Nick, because he was so ill, couldn't remember his brother at all. That was one main motivation. The other motivation was I needed to get it out of me because it was killing me. Yeah. And the third motivation was I wanted, when I lost Christopher, I thought I was the only person in the world that had lost a child to suicide, because the guilt that you feel is almost insurmountable, because you as a mother, if that's your only job is to keep your child alive, and if you can't do that, you've failed. And it took me a long, long, long time to forgive myself. And I didn't want other mothers and fathers to feel that. I didn't want them to have to go through what I did. I wanted to know that there are other people out there that are going through what they are going through, or have been through what they're going through. Yeah. It's a scarring for life.
It would be. It would be a scarring for life. And I do remember from your book and that you felt alienated as well. Weren't people crossing the street when they saw you, or it took a while to?
I think what you remember from the book is that people, if they saw me, would try and avoid me.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know how to react to me.
Yeah.
And you know, I can understand that because I wasn't sane. You know, I wasn't myself. I wanted to die.
Yeah.
I didn't want anyone to be near me. So they would have picked up on that sort of vibe, and they didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it. So how could expect them to?
How do you keep Christopher's memory alive?
I have a problem with that because I can't think of him too much. I kind of put him in a little box in my heart, and then and I talk to him by myself. I still see some of his friends, so we can talk about him when I see them. I talk to my sons about him as well, but mainly I think his memory stays alive through Nick. Because people ask Nick about Christopher because he talks about him.
Because he talks about him,
That's mainly how his memory is kept alive.
Yeah. And his ashes, aren't they in your backyard? Oh, okay. That's lovely. So you've created a garden in the back? Okay. So that...
I always wanted him to be with me. I didn't want him to be in a drawer somewhere in a funeral home. I wanted to, and he's been, I think, to 6 different houses now.
Yeah. So he's moved around.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing they do say that after you go through a tragedy like this, that it does affect your marriage. And has this actually made you feel stronger, or how has it? How is this?
I think we both dealt with the grief in very different ways, and yes, I think it's 90% of marriages do break down after loss of a child. I think we bandied together initially for Nick. And it probably in some ways has made it stronger, but then both of us are so damaged in one way as well. So we just know that the two of us get it, and that we have to support each other, because otherwise we'd be alone.
Yeah, and you have to be strong together.
Yep.
Yeah. And now your son, he is doing the mental health, going around and speaking, and what about your older son? What's Ben doing?
Ben works for a big company in Sydney. He's been working from home, obviously, through COVID.
Yeah.
He has 2 children and a beautiful wife who's a birth doula and a yoga teacher, and he's doing very well in the business world.
Oh, great. Excellent. And what are you doing now?
Mostly I'm looking after my beautiful 2-year-old grandson. I see him a lot. He's brought so much joy into my life, just as my other grandchildren did when they were little, but they've moved away. But that's my enjoyment, being with my son and my daughter-in-law and my little grandson, Finn. And we spend a lot of time together doing things together, like going to the zoo and doing things like that.
Oh, lovely. So, Jayne, you've gone through a lot. How can anyone who's listening out there now, from listening to your story, what sort of hope would you give them, or what sort of advice would you give anyone?
Well, lots of people said to me initially, time heals, and it does to some extent. You can't actually physically live with that pain forever. It does. It never goes away, but the intensity decreases over time and slowly. But I think the main thing is I'm here. And there were many occasions when I didn't want to be and nearly wasn't. But you have to think beyond yourself. You have to think about your children, your grandchildren, your husband, your wife. All those things matter. And in time, you can learn to live with the pain. It will always sit heavy within you, but you learn to carry it in a less heavy way.
I love that. I really love that. And I think having this book is a bit of a legacy. It probably is hard to look at it. Or have you reread it, or have you just kind of thought of it as it's just been a therapy? You've put it down, or
it's over for me. But I know a lot of people are still reading it and buying it, because when Nick gives a talk, he'll mention it, and there'll be people, boys and girls, listening to him that have lost a child or a brother or sister to suicide. So, and they'll take it home and let their parents read it, because they're going through the same thing that I went through. And if you don't know that sort of help exists, you don't look for it.
Yeah, that's
I remember
right.
when this first happened to me, going through the bookstore and trying to find books that that other people have gone through what I've gone through, and there wasn't. There were books about grief written by professionals, but there weren't any books from personal experience. And I would have loved that.
And books that you could relate to at all, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
And one thing I really did enjoy about your book, it's so beautifully written. It is such a good read. So I'm going to put all the links in my show notes for anyone who would like to order your book. I guess I'm assuming they can order it from the website.
Yeah.
And then if they're able to hear your son when he does the circuit. So does he do the circuit around New South Wales when he speaks about mental health?
He's been everywhere in Australia, but mostly New South Wales.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm really grateful. It's so good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your company. Please tune in next week to Life's Rich Tapestry, where you will hear another courageous conversation spoken from the heart.